Hi everybody, this is Maria Clark at Sweet Willow Designs and welcome to my studio. Thursday, December 21st is the first day of winter, so I have winter on my mind and snowflakes. So I designed this necklace with some faux wood slices and a wood burning look and some pine cones to give us that winter feel. Let's get started. Materials we'll use are, of course, our clay, and we'll use some raw sienna, ecru, translucent, and some white. And what we'll do is mix those so that you have various shades, wood shade colors. And then I've just got a whole bunch of different tools here to make marks, some toothbrushes, some dotting styluses, and my jewelry tools. And then I'll be using some jump rings and bead caps. These are going to form the top of our little pine cone, some chain, and some burnt umber paint. Let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to make a regular bullseye cane. I think what's important about this particular cane is we need to work small and thin. So I am using the smallest setting on my pasta machine, and I just made a really small center piece, the snake, and then I'm wrapping it in a lighter shade of ecru, which I just mixed ecru and white. Then I will roll on the translucent, and I'm just going to keep layering those colors of clay that I have until I get a cane that, in this case, I have about a 2-inch cane here. And you can see it's just a regular bullseye. There's nothing special to it, but I just keep wrapping, and I kept the sheets really, really thin until I got right to the outside. And on the outside, they're a little bit thicker. And you can see this is about 2 inches. You can make it smaller. 2 inches is a pretty big disc. These are the patterns that we're going to use for our snowflakes. So before we get started though, I've got my cane here, and I am going to cut slices off, but I want to rough up the edge. So I'm just using some crunched up tin foil to make some marks in the clay and kind of texture that clay, and then a tool to create some little indents like you'd see in a regular wood slice. And we'll just do that all the way around, and then I'll use some tin foil to just go back over it and give it a kind of rough texture. Then I will slice off the number of slices that I want. In this case, I'm going to use 3. And when I did this project, I did about a 1/4 of an inch slice. That might be slightly too thick. I think I might go slightly smaller the next time. And then I'm using a variety of tools, and I used an ink pen and just to make the center dot. And then I'm using a tool. This is just like it's actually one of those little pearl tools that you can, the little pearl makers, but you could use a knitting needle or whatever you've got to make these marks. We'll just draw out our 6 spokes for the snowflake. And I've got I did one on a different sort of solid color clay, so you hopefully can see that a little bit better than on the wood slice. And then I'm just going to follow my pattern and make my marks. Again, I'm just using that ink pen. The thing is, you can use whatever tools you have around the house to make marks with. So there's lots of options. You don't have to go buy specialized tools for this. So I am using that little pearl stylus to make some little circle dots, and then draw out the spokes of the snowflake. And again, use my patterns or use whatever you've got. And then I have a dotting tool, and I'm just going in and making some additional marks, placing those dots to make a star-shaped or snowflake shape. Look around your house and see what you've got. There's all kinds of potential for tools. You don't have to necessarily go out and buy a bunch of tools. I've been collecting for a long time, so I have a lot of different kinds of tools, but you can search your house. You can use skewers, from the kitchen. You can use nails. You can use all kinds of things that you might find around your house to make textures on clay. So there's a close-up of that one. And then here's the third one. And I have a little heart. I think this is like a 3/16 one of those Kemper cutters, and I have a little heart one, and I thought that would make a nice pattern for the snowflake. So I'm just drawing in cutting in. I'm not cutting all the way through, of course. I'm just embossing basically. And then again using my either knitting needle And you know, those knitting needles, I'm going to put a link, I'm going to put a couple of links down below because I use the double-ended knitting needles for a lot of projects, and they come in really fine gauges and they make perfect tools like this. So I'm going to go ahead and put some links down below for you so you can check those out if you want to. So we just continue to just follow the pattern. You can freehand this. Make whatever patterns are pleasing to you. It's kind of like a wood burning look when we're done with that. Then I'm using the ball stylus just to put some extra texture. Now I have this wire tool that came in like a sculpting set. This is in the clay section, but a toothbrush would work good. Sandpaper would, coarse grit sandpaper would work good. What I'm doing is just roughing up the ring, the outer ring, so that it looks like a wood slice, a little bit more like a wood slice. And you see little particles come off, but I'm just really heavily texturing that, and then I'm texturing a little bit on the top. So now we're going to make our pine cones. And again, optional, you can dress this up as much as you want or leave it as simple as you'd like, but I have some head pins and also some bead caps. And I've got this clay, this is just scrap clay from the different colors that I was using. I've rolled it out onto the number 1 setting, and I'm using a cutter. I think the big deal here is to just use whatever you use a similar size. Use a cutter so that you get the same size of pine cone. And then I just roll that in my hand and created kind of like a football shape. And I'll add my head pin, and you can see the shape that that's getting. And then I'm rolling out a snake of clay. I've rolled out a snake of clay, and it's very rough roll because I want it to have some texture. I want it to be thick and thin in some places, and I'm just going to wrap that around, not pushing too hard, but making good contact. Wrap it around to simulate a pine cone. And then I will put my bead cap on. And I'm putting my bead cap on so I can get the form at the top. And then I'm going to drop all my little pine cones into a bed of cornstarch, and I will bake them in that. And that cornstarch really helps to keep their shape. I won't get any flat spots. So they baked for an hour, all of these various pieces, and now I'm going to start putting these together. So I've got my jump rings, and I've kind of placed my pine cone so you can get a sense of how that's going to ultimately look. And now what I want to do is I'm going to look at how I want my wood slices oriented, because I need to drill some holes. I always drill my holes after I've baked the clay. It's just easier for me, and I feel like I get a really clean hole. If I do it before then, it gets can get misshaped, and I don't like that. And I'm using a Sharpie just to mark where I'm going to drill my holes. And I'm just sort of forming what would be a nice necklace shape so it'll drape well. I have a little palm hand drill. I'm going to put a link for a drill. You can also use a manual drill if you don't have a hand drill. This is a Dremel, and it's fantastic, by the way, but they don't make them anymore. So there are some other hand drills, palm held hand drills that you can get maybe at Harbor Freight or something like that, but I'll put a link for those on there. And it makes really quick work of drilling. So I'm going to go ahead and drill the holes in each of my pieces and make sure I have some nice clean holes. That's why I like to put the little Sharpie mark, because it's really hard to eyeball it to know where you want to place, have your jump rings and how you want the piece to hang. Okay, so I've got all my holes drilled. Now I'm going to apply the, this is burnt umber paint, and you could use craft paints, whatever you've got. And I'm using a stiff brush because I want to get them in all the indented marks that I made to form the snowflake. So I have a really good image of the snowflake, and just rub it on, and it's going to stain all of that light colored clay. And then I'll just spray a paper towel lightly so I can get that off. And see how it stained it? And I'll show you in a minute. Oh, look at how pretty that comes up when you start to rub away all that excess paint. I think it looks really a lot like wood burning. Just get some excess off the back there. And that's how it looks against a piece that doesn't have any paint. And we'll do that to each one of these pieces, so this is really sped up. Again, damp but not wet paper towel to get all that excess off. One thing I wanted to mention here, because I don't have this necessarily in the video, but once I have all of this paint on and it's very well dried, it's cured, essentially dry, I'm going to coat it with a coat of Varathane, and I use the matte Varathane because I don't like the high gloss, but you may have a high gloss, and then I'll cure that for another 15 minutes in the oven. I'm just putting a little extra on that one, didn't have quite enough. But I'll let those dry, and then I'll put a light coat of Varathane, and then I'll cure those for 15 minutes. Now we're going to do the pine cones. These are little pine cones that we made. And I had to rinse off and scrub off, the cornstarch that might have been left. And then just like we did on the wood slice, we're going to apply that burnt umber paint. And then I'll just take off the excess there. And see how that really highlights the little, so it's starting to get a little look. And there you'll see a few pieces that have been done and how they look together. So now I'm going to actually form the loops at the top, and I use these Wolf pliers. I'm going to put some links for these too because these are fantastic pliers. Do you notice the little grooves there? Those really help when you're making your loops, and they have a pair of grooved for other purposes too. So check those out because I think you're really going to like them. And then I make a loop on the top of each of those pine cones. And then I want the pine cones to hang a little bit. I want them to hang a certain way. See, like this. I want them to hang 2 on either side and then 1 in the middle. So I need to create a little bit of a dangle here. So I'm just using some jump rings, and I'll open those jump rings and I'll put the 3 jump rings together to form a little chain. And you can see that little chain there. And then I can apply one of the pine cones to the bottom of the chain, and then I'll skip one, and I will apply 2 pine cones to the top, and that's going to allow it to have a little bit of a drape so they're not all bunched up. Make sure those are nice and secure. And then I'll put my other one on. Okay, and then now I'm going to kind of design this a little bit. So I already had an idea, of course, because I drilled my holes, and I got these 15mm heavy gauge jump rings that I'm just going to put my 3 pieces together, my 3 wood slices, get those ready. Okay, and now once I get all of those jump rings on, I kind of have a design decision, because as I was working on this and looking at it, I really liked the look of the pine cones and the wood slices, but I thought it needed a little something more, so I added some things to it that you'll see here in a little bit once I get the rest of those jump rings on. You can also use some different materials to put these together. I also thought it might be nice with some tied leather as opposed to jump rings. Now I'm just measuring because I want to have about a 20-inch necklace. So the pieces across were 6.5 inches, and then I had about 1 inch for the clasp. So that told me, how much chain I needed on either side to get about 20 inches. So I'll put the clasp on, and that's how the piece is looking. Now this is where I'm talking about the design piece here, because see how it would look with the plain? I thought that was pretty, but I thought, well, I want to add a little red berry, and then I want to add something green to simulate the pine trees, the needles on a pine tree. So I made some little, just with a head pin and some red glass beads, a little kind of berry that I'm going to put on my little pine cone dangle, and I'm using that center ring. Remember, I had 3 rings, so I had 1 pine cone on the bottom, 2 on the top ring, and then I'll put the red bead on the center one. And then I have some embroidery floss that I thought would make a pretty pine cone because it'll kind of spread out. So I'm just tying that on the top jump ring. And you can see how it's starting to come together a little bit. I'll put it on the necklace so I can see what it looks like. There. See, I think that looks a little better, but I got to cut these down a little bit. They're way too long. So I'll cut them down, and then I'm going to spread the threads in the embroidery floss, spread them out, so they have a little bit of a pine tree look. See, I think that looks a little nicer with a little something extra. So this is the piece as it's finished, and there it is, with the 4 different kind of sprays of pine cone. Here's a close-up. Doesn't that? I think that is so pretty. I just love the way that looks. So that's one of the patterns. There's another one, the little snowflake patterns. And then here's the other one. And that's how the finished piece looks. Now, some of you may not like, this is pretty big. Some of you may not like the way this looks. It might be too chunky for you, and that's okay. How about you just do one with a central pendant type piece? And I made a little smaller pine cones for those. Hey, I want to thank you for joining me on my studio. It's been a long time since I've been to back to polymer clay, but I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed the project. Let me know if you try it out, and I'd love to see any pictures. Please consider subscribing, leaving me a comment. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining me in my studio today. Take care.